I'm Gareth Armstrong, and welcome to this Razor's Edge podcast. This is our 10 Entrepreneurial Archetypes series, where we are talking through the different kinds of entrepreneurs that are out there in the world. As you're listening to this, you may have heard that we have spoken in the first episode about David, Think David and Goliath. Then in our second episode, we spoke about struggling artists, which was a fun and also fascinating analysis, which may apply to you. In the previous episode, which was episode 3, we spoke about big deal hunters. And in this episode, we are moving on. But before we do, across the way from me is Alon Reyes, CEO of Race Corp, and we're picking his brain about these archetypes. Alon, where are we going next?
All right, so let's talk about the eternal child. The eternal child is the archetype of the entrepreneur who likes to play, likes the fun part of entrepreneurship, likes all the fun things that entrepreneurship brings, but doesn't like the other side, doesn't like the paperwork, doesn't like the requirement for discipline.
So when you say doesn't like, does that mean, because I'm thinking about a child, does that mean that there's tantrum throwing and toys being thrown out the cot when that occurs? Or are we just simply saying that the childlike instinct is to enjoy as opposed to take responsibility?
This is really about avoidance, avoiding all the hard things about entrepreneurship. It's not about throwing your toys when you have to do it, it's just avoiding them. There's a level of laziness or avoiding the responsibility of it's not my job to do it, I'll get to it later, and so on.
In one respect, I see perhaps the avoidance as an issue, and it could be framed that way. But is there not another side to this that we can explore very quickly, which is that an entrepreneur like this could be quite successful in that they might delegate quite well?
It could be, but they are far more likely to abdicate than delegate. They're far more likely to avoid the work required in order to delegate properly, which means that you have to think about what you have to delegate, describe what you have to delegate, provide the metrics around what is required, the qualitative requirements around what you're delegating. That's work to delegate. Abdication is, oh, can't you just do this? Yeah, just do this for me. That's abdication, without the effort of description and systems and process around that.
Okay, so they're far more likely to abdicate rather than delegate. So how do we then identify this entrepreneurial archetype?
Well, there's some physical clues that generally these types of entrepreneurial archetypes have a lot of gadgets. So gadgets are like toys, so a lot of gadgets around them. And that is about the new shiny thing.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about what's new. So that might also manifest in a way that they start things and then, oh, what's that? And then get disinterested in that very quickly and then look for the next toy. They disregard the need for process and paperwork. It's a big part of the clues around them. They might even make statements about there's too much process here. We need to be far more fluid in the moment. And that it could be true, but at scale, businesses cannot scale without systems and process. And your eternal child is therefore less likely to scale a business. There are generally, and I'm generalizing here, people pleasers. So they will agree less boundaries. They will agree to things that cannot be done because they don't want the conflict in the moment.
Can I extend that and say just simply agree but no follow through?
Exactly. No follow through. They might agree and then not consider the level of work required in order to actually deliver on what they've promised or agreed to. And then when they realize that it requires all that discipline and process, then would just abandon it halfway and then come up with an excuse. There are generally relationship issues as a result of all these promises that have been broken.
And that could be relationships, it feels like it probably everywhere. So employees, other stakeholders, so maybe shareholders or partners.
Yeah, and you'll see that in a relatively high attrition. So generally, if you look at the eternal child's workplace, it's all very nice. and people are attracted to that. But you will see that if that is combined with the fact that there's a high churn rate in staff, that's a good clue that we are dealing with the eternal child archetype. So the attraction is come and play with me with all my toys, but the important relationship stuff in terms of fulfilling promises, etc., is not there.
And it's really difficult to have a one-sided relationship, and that's what it seems to sound like.
It's not a one-sided relationship. It is a inability to deliver on promises and commitments made in that relationship. So what happens is there's a breakdown of trust because you'll say things in the moment but not deliver on them. And then that becomes a pattern, and eventually the other person goes, well, he or she keeps saying this, but they never deliver.
In a moment, I'm going to ask you for an example of this, please. But is this person lazy?
So there's an intrinsic laziness. There's this initial energy around the start. There is a laziness around the finish. And if you're asking about an example, I'm going to help you out there. I can't give you an example because generally the eternal child archetype doesn't land up being successful.
It doesn't rise, yeah.
You might have these people in your ecosystem that you know these individuals, but they never become prominent examples because of the lack of follow through, because of the inability to appreciate systems and process and the discipline required in order to build that. They don't become prolific. And if they do, there is an extraordinary implosion afterwards, a public implosion afterwards. So they become bad examples or they disappear. But if I think about my entrepreneurial ecosystem, I can identify the 2 or 3 people in that ecosystem that have got very strong eternal child archetype and following exactly the same pattern. Beautiful offices, funky offices, lots of gadgets, lots of fun things happening. The business is just not making money. It starts off well. It captures the imagination of some clients and some staff, and then very soon the clients realize that there's no follow through and staff realize there's no follow through. That then is followed by a massive attrition of staff. That means that there is an inability to deliver to client, and the clients then start to disappear, and then it goes into the implosion state.
Okay, before we move on, are there any other ways to identify this entrepreneurial archetype?
Yeah, I suppose 2 other things would be really bad at decision making short-term decisions. Psychologists would call this the very high id, the child, as part of their psychology. And very often there is a discussion about work-life balance, and not for any other reason but to justify why they play.
Yeah, more play.
More play.
As I think about this individual, I'm wondering what is actually going on here. What's happening underneath the surface?
If I had to hazard a guess, it probably came from overdoting parents, overindulged perhaps, or totally underindulged, the other side of it, and then wanting to justify why they need to be indulged now. There's no real drive to become super successful. There's a fantasy of it, but it's not innate enough. There are probably self-esteem issues that need to be explored. And you would probably see a stress factor that the individual gets highly stressed, especially when it comes to taking on responsibility or making big decisions. So if you see, oh, there's a big decision, they get stressed, or they're taking on a certain responsibility, they try to shy away from that. And that comes from self-esteem, self-belief, and those kinds of things.
I've got 2 questions then that follow out of this. The first is, how do we shift them, which is an important thing to consider. But then on the other side of that is, if we can't shift them, is there a possibility that they can be harnessed, leveraged, used for their strength? In other words, could they work in a partnership, for example?
They could, if there was an appreciation of the positive they bring in terms of newness around things that they discover, because generally the positive side of the eternal child is that they are curious They like new things, they explore new things, and that has value.
Yeah, there's an energy there that can be quite attractive.
Yeah, they try new things because there's a level of fearlessness around trying new things. So it's around the child mindset, which is, oh, what does this do? And oh, what happens if I push that button? So there's a fearlessness in that, which is a very powerful attribute of the eternal child. So they're good if they are then matched with somebody who has the discipline.
What no one's seeing at home is how you just did the yin and the yang almost with your hands to bring that balance to them. Of course, the risk there is that what once was attractive may end up driving you crazy. And so who knows what kind of partnership that would be in. But then how do we shift them? Let's go there.
If I work with an eternal child archetype, and remember, it could be partly, it doesn't need to be the whole, then my work is around their true passion and actually from their childhood. Because you want to focus on what are you passionate about, because generally they might be passionate about lots of things, but trying to ascertain what's the thing that they are most passionate about, because then you want to focus on that particular thing. So identify the passion and then focus on that particular passion in order to build that out as their strength. The second thing I do with those that present with eternal child archetype is work on small responsibilities, because you're trying to build confidence that you can take on this responsibility and deliver on it. Look, you delivered on that. So don't go for big responsibilities. Just do this. Was that so hard? Okay, let's do more of that. So work on responsibilities. Decision making. Very hard for this archetype, so get them to make decisions. Then label those decisions. That's a decision. Let's make that decision together. Then explore whether that was the right or wrong decision afterward. And if it was, that builds self-confidence. Oh, you can make good decisions. No one in the world makes perfect decisions all the time. So you're just trying to make a lot of good decisions. So it's about really identifying them and ensuring that they take cognizance of the fact that they can make good decisions, and probably more often than they thought they could.
It's so interesting as I'm listening to you. It really does feel like you have to go back and be their parent in a very positive way,
Yes.
positive reinforcing way.
That's such a good observation. So almost reparenting them. But that goes to the entrepreneur who is listening to this and going, there's a lot of me in that, can reparent themselves by following the same thing. And even if you partially got this attribute, then you can still reparent yourself or work with a mentor or a coach and be quite vulnerable and say, I've got these issues. Please work with me on these issues.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, Alon, please take us home with a couple more of these opportunities, please.
The last two things, I reflect on their need to be liked rather than respected. And I use that juxtaposition about liked versus respected. Why do you need to be liked? And do you realize that when you're not following through, you lose respect? And what does that mean to you? And so you explore that, not that I'm a psychologist, but you explore the juxtaposition between respected and liked. And finally, you take them into the future and extrapolate the future. So, okay, if we continue on this basis, you keep churning staff. It keeps costing you money to bring in new staff. There's the cost of all your gadgets and all the new things and these all unfinished things, all these toy boxes that are half open and half used. Where does this take you? How is that in 20 years' time? Where are you going to be? And I try to take them into the future for them to see themselves in the future if they just continue on with this pattern. And very often that is not a rosy future, and that brings some sobriety to the moment. And that, together with the work on decision making, on taking on responsibilities, etc., starts to shift that entrepreneur.
And that's the voice of Alon Reyes, CEO of Race Corp. And this has been episode 4 in our 10 Entrepreneurial Archetypes series. If you were listening to this and you thought, that sounds like me, that is the point of this series. It's there to help you to identify the strengths, the weaknesses, and of course, inside of the weaknesses, the opportunities that exist with understanding yourself as an entrepreneur better. I'm Gareth Armstrong. This has been a Razor's Edge podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.